Hey there, welcome to Have You Asked Your Dad? This week is a little bit different because load shedding exists, and meetings exist, and life's busyness exists. All of that together meant that Shauno and I couldn't actually find time to even meet on a Zoom call to record this week's episode. But what we thought we'd do instead is give you a little bit of insight into how our conversations go when we're not really being recorded. So this episode is a conversation that we had over the period of about 3 days, back and forth across WhatsApp. So yes, we're pulling you into our secret conversations, but we are still asking a question that dads don't often get asked. And today we're asking, what is your word for 2023? What word do you hope will define your year? We took some time to think about what else would be and to talk about it further. That's coming up right now. Of course, remember, this is what our WhatsApp conversations actually sound like.
Hey, Uncle Terence. Listen, I was thinking about that thing you mentioned yesterday about load shedding and when we're going to record our podcast. I'm out at the moment taking Zoe for a walk, getting some fresh air. And I generally think whilst I walk. And I wondered if we couldn't maybe do this week's podcast via WhatsApp. I mean, our load shedding schedules are insane. And this way we can, well, just have the conversation in a different format. What do you think of that?
Hey dude, I've just dropped the boys off and I'm gonna head back home so I can get started with work again. Yeah, load shedding has been a complete nightmare and I've got meetings all day today, so I think you're right, this is the best way to do it. Do you have any idea about what we could talk about? Do you have a question in mind that Dad should get asked? Or anyone should get asked, really?
Hey, still me, still walking, still thinking. I thought maybe the question this week we could ask dads, since we don't often get asked, how do you set the tone for your year? I see a lot of people talking about their word of the year. I've never done that. And I'm wondering, maybe we pick a word for the year each? First though, what are your thoughts on this? Setting the tone for the year ahead by choosing a word and I don't know, do you live that into fruition or what's the premise? Do you know?
Yeah, just watering the garden now. I like the question. It's not something that I have really done. Like, I'm not a New Year's resolution guy, and this kind of strikes like a New Year's resolution light, where you don't have like dieting as a thing, but just like a word, this is the vibe I'm gonna keep for the year. So that makes a lot of sense. I have done something like that before when it comes to the blog, the Aphrodite blog, where I I'll say, okay, for this year, the word that I'm focusing on is community. And then for most of that year, I will be trying to build up a community around the blog or try to build up like little fatherhood communities and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, I find those kinds of things to be really helpful actually because um, in the business of life, when you're making a lot of like micro decisions and a lot of macro decisions, when you have a single word, almost like a mission statement in a word, it helps you with those decisions. So like, if you're if the word of the year was excitement, then when you're deciding to do I go on holiday or do I save the money for something else, you can go, well, the word of the year is excitement, and I'm going to choose to go on holiday. Or if the word of the year is uh, saving or building for the future or whatever, something long term, then when it comes to making a decision, you can go, well, the word of the year isn't excitement. The word of the year is kind of long term vision. So I'm more likely to save. So I do find having a word like that for your year is really helpful in the decision making process. And I also think it's helpful to assess where you are at the moment, right? Because when you're thinking about what word do I need for 2023, you kind of do need to think about the year you had previously and where you're at in your life. So it's good to assess where you're at. So I love this. So, can you start us off? Can you tell me what your word of the year should be?
Okay, yeah, what you say makes sense. I must say, I'm very aware that dictionaries often choose a word of the year, but as a past tense type of thing. Merriam-Webster, I think, last year chose gaslighting. Gives you an idea of how the year was work-wise for many people. And one of the others chose goblin mode. And that's obviously the year that's been, as opposed to the year ahead. And from what I can gather, we would select a word that would, as you quite already say, sort of set the tone for the year to come, something you can refer back to, something that maybe keeps you on course. And I see that generally these words are quite powerful words. People choosing things like amplify or joy or abundance, maybe. So I can't say that I have a word. I suppose I'm I'm inclined to say I wish there were a method, a template that you would follow. Do you remember back in school you would come up with these names for yourself if you were a pirate unicorn, and you would have to use your grand's last name and your pet's first name combined to create, right? You know what I'm talking about. Your stripper name, I suppose, as opposed to a pirated unicorn. And in this case, I'm thinking, my birth month and then the number of letters in your name multiplied by. That would make it a lot easier, wouldn't it? But that's not going to be the case. So I'm going to start jotting words down, I think, and seeing what pops up. It might be a good method to use to try and find a word of the year. I think I have a sense of what I want the feeling for the year to be. Maybe that's what'll lead me to find a word of the year. How are you going to go about figuring out what the word of the year is for you?
I love the idea of a word of the year formula. That's so clever. Like, you would input how many times in the last month have you sighed? How many times in the last year have you written an email to your boss quitting that you just deleted because you realized that you still need to earn money to survive? Or how many times did you find yourself eating a bowl of ice cream in the dark in the middle of the night, and you put all of those numbers into one big Excel spreadsheet and it spits out the word that you need for 2023. I absolutely think that that is a winning product. Like, forget Wordle, that is the product we need. So, that notwithstanding, like, that doesn't exist. I think the way I'm going to go about trying to figure out what my word will be is to really have to think hard about what my goals are for the year. So, not just with work or with what I want to physically achieve, but what kind of person I want to be. Does that make sense? At the end of the year, if I had to ask my close friends or my wife or even my kids, hey, what word would you use to describe Terrence of 2023? I would want them to kind of get to the same word that I'm outputting now, if that makes sense. So I need to spend a bit of time thinking about what that is. Can't wait to hear what yours is, though.
Okay, I think I'm getting closer to a word, Terence, because I'm taking into consideration last year, as you were saying earlier, and the feeling I'd like to have at the end of this year. I'm not sure that I'll be able to create such an awareness or such a manifestation that family and friends will look at me and go, wow, you had such a word, insert word kind of year. But maybe the word I'm choosing for 2023 is brave. And I say that on the back of 2022 because it was such a tumultuous year. Do you remember there was that post, I think it was the child psychologist from Durban, Naomi Holt, I think that's her name, that was doing the rounds towards the end of last year saying, the reason you're so tired, we're all so tired. 2020 and 2021 were so draining for so many people. And we went into 2022 thinking, we got to nail it all, right? Let's get social, let's get back to work, let's get doing the things again. And by the October, we were frazzled. And it's made a lot of changes for a lot of people as they've reassessed their lives. And I'm one such human being. So going into 2023, I've got my sights on some completely different occupational outset, outlook rather is the word I'm looking for. And from a work perspective, things are very different for me. And it's been difficult. It was difficult to make that leap, to make that decision, to leave and to start something new. So I've got a brand new work life that's going to need to balance with my home life. And I think the best way for me to carry myself through that is to remind myself that I am being brave and stepping into something new, and would like to use that lens for 2023. So, yeah, my word for the year is brave. What's yours?
Wow. Okay. Brave is a really good word. Before I tell you my word, I just want to dig into that a bit more because I would have thought that brave would have been your word for 2022. Because, like you said, you made some very big decisions, some very big changes, and you've had to be brave on for a lot of things and for your family for quite a few years. So I must say, I'm a little bit surprised that brave is your word for 2023. I would have expected like relaxation time or like self care or something like that because um, life is so hectic. But yeah, I do like the word brave. Do you feel like there's a lot of things coming up in 2023 that you specifically have to be brave for, or is it just kind of like the world is nuts? We are in a country that's struggling. There's a lot of hectic stuff going on, and we just all have to be brave? Or is it more specifically for what you know is coming up for Mr. Sean Lewis himself?
Hey man, sorry about that long radio silence. Full on dadding. All gas, no brakes. All right. Here we are though. So interesting that you would reflect on the word brave for me, and I can see why many people have said that same thing to me, especially in hindsight. Zoe turned 7 in January of 2023, and it has been 7 years of whew, a health medical odyssey. The journey continues, my friend. And when I look back at it, I don't really think of myself as having been brave. Although I recall sitting in the therapist's office and going through, for him to tell me you've got burnout and you're very close to depression, for him to tell me that I'm living in a constant state of trauma and stress. And I said, "Oh, this I just thought this is just my life." So for me, it's not so much I can't look back at that and say I was brave because that's just in 6, 7 years. Now, however, I feel like I'm choosing directions. And 2023 is the very first time since 2006 that I'm not affiliated to a radio station or a company in any way, shape, or form. I'm freelancing. And it's a very brave move, especially when you take into consideration the world and the economy and just little old South Africa, what Cape Town's dealing with. So sometimes I think it's a brave, stupid move, but I've also been reminded to check myself in the sense that I have value to give and so much of it, and I need to be brave to step out into that. So it's far more in a personal work sense. At the same time, doing some deep work on myself, regulating my nervous system, doing some form of exercise or meditation, and then making sure that I can maintain that through 2023. And I think the best way for me to do that is to choose a word like the word brave. I mean, there are others that have popped up, but that one strikes a chord for me the most. And in fact, I was recently asked to be a panelist on a podcasting event, and I wanted to say no. But thankfully, now that I've chosen the word brave, I think I will probably say yes. Okay, now where are you at? What have you come up with a word yet, Terence? Any closer?
Uh, Well, look, regardless, I think yeah, you have been very brave and continue to be very brave, and so I'm glad that you decided to say yes to that podcasting panel because you have a lot to offer, and so you have to be brave to say yes to that. And I guess people will only think of you as brave or stupid depending on how successful you are. Success is that determination, but you know, who cares what other people think? You feel brave, and that's the important thing. Um, okay, enough stalling for me and for my word. And I've been thinking about it a lot over the last few days as we've been having this conversation back and forth. And I think the word for me is trust. And the reason why I'm going with trust, because I know you're going to ask me this, like, why trust, Terrence? Um, I think I want to trust other people more, like other people's ability, other people's goodness. I want to trust that people are essentially good and that they aren't going to mess me around. I want to trust that people are able to do good work with my colleagues. I want to trust that if I'm hiring someone to do work for me, that they're able to do what they've promised. Um, More than all of that, though, I also want to learn or focus on trusting myself. Like at this point in my life, in my late 30s, I know what I'm about, I know what I'm capable of, and I want to be able to trust that I have the wisdom to to make decisions and to back myself with those decisions because I've gone through enough life, I've done enough big things to know that I can handle stuff and can make good decisions about life. So when I make a decision, I don't want to be doubting that decision 3 weeks later because I want to be able to trust Terrence from 3 weeks ago because no, that guy was wise and I need to trust him. So trust, I think, is going to be my word for the year. I also think if you're trusting, there's a lot less anxiety because you're not constantly trying to look out on how things are going to go wrong or how people are going to mess you around. You're much more likely to live a peaceful life if you're trusting of what's going on around you. Now, just like you are concerned about where does bravery become stupidity, I I'm very worried about where trust becomes.
Where trust becomes. Sorry, the way your message ends, it leaves me wondering where trust becomes something. I'm sure there was a word that dropped off there, and using WhatsApp to communicate has its interesting moments. I like the word for you, and I totally understand that there's an element of distrust in choosing the word trust. As you said, when does bravery become stupidity? I think trusting others always comes back to, have they earned that trust, right? I used to like to trust people in their abilities to do things right off the bat. I'm giving it to you, run with it, only to have my fingers burnt a few times. Having said that, though, you're quite right in your statements. Terence of 3 weeks ago, you trusted him when he made that decision, and you should be able to trust him now still too. Doesn't say you can't change your mind on something when there's new information, but to learn to trust yourself and your innate abilities that you have so much value to give in the things that you do, I think is a great word. And I stand by you. I will remind you to trust yourself as you tackle 2023, Terence. Well done. Nice word.
Okay, so WhatsApp clearly just cut off that last part of what I was saying, but your response made a lot of sense, even though you didn't get the full end of my of my video. Um, what I was saying is I'm very concerned about where trust becomes foolishness, and your response makes like really does dig into that. The idea that you need to kind of start with trust, and if you get burned, that trust is lost. It's very interesting though, because you're saying, is the trust earned? And I'm wondering if I want to maybe have the idea of, can the trust be lost? So your starting point is I start with trusting you, and that can either be maintained or it can be lost. It's not something that you instinctively earn, and I think that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to stop starting off relationships and interactions with a lack of trust, if that makes sense. And you're right, I might get burned this year, and I almost think that a second part of using trust as your tone word of 2023, a second part of that is being okay with the fact that you might get burned and that trust might be abused, and not beating yourself up for being trusting. But again, that's like we were saying at the beginning, because I'm saying this is the tone word for 2023. If that does happen, if I do get burned, if the trust is broken, I'm not going to beat myself up because I have been keeping my word going for the year. So it's going to help me with those situations.
Exactly. I think that's the entire point of setting a word, choosing a word, setting a tone, coming up with an intention, and then always having something to lean back on and go, does this align with what I had chosen for my year? How will I feel when I get to the end of the year and I look back on it and I haven't managed to stay in line with the word, yours being trust, mine being brave? So yeah, this is going to be an interesting exercise. And I guess throughout the year, we'll be able to reflect from time to time on making decisions and following through with them in line with the words that we've chosen. I'm very keen to know if anybody else has done this exercise and how they went about it, right? Write a list of words. Then I kind of guess you'd narrow them down by looking at a bunch of them on the page and going, this one resonates with me a lot much better. And then ultimately, for me, I went with a gut feel. And I think we're onto good things here. With bravery and trust, we take on 2023.
Thank you so much for listening to this very special and strange episode of Have You Asked Your Dad? We definitely would love to know what your word of 2023 would be. Now that you've heard what ours is, you're totally allowed to steal ours if you want to, but maybe you have your own. We would love to hear what that is. Connect with us on Instagram, search for Have You Asked Your Dad, or you can send us an email. Just send it to hyaydpod@gmail.com and we will reply to you as soon as we get your email. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you again next week. Maybe it will be a normal one if Eskom allows. And if not, we'll just do this one again. Thank you so much for listening. Cheers.